So we're now joined by an energy analyst, Hilton Trollip, and he joins us now via our video link. Hilton, thank you so much for your time this evening here on SABC News. Now, I'm sure for Eskom breaking this very sad news to the country, they must have been really pained to have to break the news that load shedding is certainly back in our lives once again.
Yes, I'm sure this is really hard for them. I do want to point out, Mbali, that Eskom issued their system status report in January. We're in January still, on the 12th of January. And I'm sitting with that on my screen here. And Eskom has been very clear in its system report that there is a severe risk of load shedding. So firstly, it's factual that Eskom itself has been expecting this load shedding. And the reason for that is the previous very severe load shedding that we had more than 300 days ago was largely owing to a number of large generators at Kusile, 3 of them at Medupi, 2, Coburg, being badly damaged and going offline for a matter of years. This is why we had the bad load shedding. So load shedding ended when we managed to fix Eskom, through huge efforts, managed to fix stations that machines at stations that we had that had already been broken. But the thing is, when they fixed them, they got South Africa into a situation where we had just enough power, nothing in reserve. These reserves that the minister's speaking about are emergency reserves. So we've been living on the edge, and Eskom has been doing everything possible to prevent the load shedding, but we can only have load shedding if the conditions are very favorable to perfect. And they can't remain very, very favorable to perfect when we don't have sufficient extra power stations. So as soon as some of these power stations that the minister and Eskom refer to as their best power stations, many of the generating units inside those power stations are between 35 and 40 years old, and they're unreliable and they've been hammered. So we're stuck between quite political statements where Eskom is pushed to say, will there be load shedding? And they say, we can't say. Is load shedding over? They have never said it's over. They've always said, we're nearly there, we're within reach, etc., etc. But what hasn't happened, we haven't built any new power stations to actually put Eskom or the country into a position where we're not always living completely on the edge. And so 2 things now. We've just gone over the edge. And 2, if you go and look, it's on the internet, it's called a system status report from January. You'll see a table, and there's just there are 3 possibilities: yellow, orange, green, and red. And if I look in this table over here, down the line, starting the end of January and going then into February, March, it's just red, 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 red. And the red means greater than 2,000 megawatts short to meet demand and reserves. So now, that's the reality.
Yeah, and Hilton, I mean, you are saying that the signs really have always been there. And I mean, looking at the report you keep on referring to, you are clearly saying that you are not surprised that we find ourselves in this sort of position in the country. But at the same time, they did manage to keep the lights on for 10 months. How would you say that this load shedding that we are experiencing right now, how different is this load shedding as compared to what we've experienced in the past? Because a lot of work, as Eskom is saying, has been put into ensuring that the lights stay on.
It's very different. So as I was saying, the load shedding before, we were sitting with a situation with 6 very large units on long-term unplanned outage. There was that chimney collapse at Kusile, big chimneys collapsed, and they took 3 units out for more than a year. There was that explosion at Medupi. There was the mess up at the Coburg life extension. So all of those units now are back on, and that is, we're just on the edge, whereas beforehand we always were hugely in deficit. So we're living along the edge, and so it's very different, but we can we're always at a risk of load shedding in these months, as it shows on the Eskom report. And every time, as they say, they didn't expect these units to go out at Matimba and Letabo, but they did. And as I said, those power stations the different units there are between 30 and 40 years old. And those are amongst our newer power stations. There's a number of power stations that were commissioned in the 70s and early 80s. And as they say, they didn't expect those ones to go out, but those other ones, we do expect them to go out. So we're going to be having not as bad load shedding, not as much of it, but probably, unless we're super lucky, until we build more power stations. And when I say power stations, I don't mean big coal things. I mean the new renewable ones that we can build quickly, which the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy has failed to commission over the past 5 years. When we build those, then we will move into the new era of having reserve and no load shedding. Until then, we're living on the edge.
Yeah, and maybe, I mean, I heard you earlier on, Hilton, talking about being caught up in political statements here. And I know that last year, before the elections, a number of people were saying that, well, after the elections, load shedding is coming back. Do you think perhaps maybe Eskom and the government were pressured to ensure that they do keep the lights on because of what we are experiencing politically as a country?
So, they always, I call them conspiracy theories if there's no substance in them. So there are always different pressures. Firstly, there's a pressure on the politicians always to give positive spin. They'll do it anywhere, in the best governments. Also, you won't give the pessimistic outlook. You'll say, this is, most likely what's going to happen unless something goes wrong. I don't think that if it were true that political pressure was brought to bear, then the government would have brought political pressure on Eskom to not have the load shedding before the election, not after. I don't believe those stories.
Yeah.
I think that would be criminal, and I don't think that the people that are running either Eskom at the moment, look, we had, according to the Eskom parliamentary inquiry, they listed about 90 people that should be criminally investigated. But I think we've passed that. We've got rid of those people.
All right.
We've also largely got rid of them out of government.
All right. We are running out of time. I just want your predictions for the rest of the year. I mean, you are saying that we are living on edge here. What can South Africans expect in terms of load shedding throughout this year?
Okay, so I will just say what Eskom say, because they have done all the calculations. And they say here, starting in February, there's a likely risk scenario of all the weeks of February of greater than 2,000 load shedding. Then when March comes along, it goes to less than 1,000 possibly. But then when April comes along, all the way through until August, it's likely greater than 2,000. Now remember, that's not all the time.
Yeah.
And that's only if things happen that are unfavorable. But I'd say probably we're going to be having this kind of every now and then stage 2, stage 3 load shedding when a few units in these old power stations go down until they fix them again. Unless, of course, there are any more disasters like we had before the last terrible load shedding.
All right. Hilton, thank you so much for your insight and for your time this evening.